Hi, this is Dr. Carl Goldkamp. If you're interested in learning about the ketogenic diet like I was, to save my own life, then this is probably the podcast for you. 8 years ago, I knew nothing about it. 6 years ago, it saved my life. 3 years ago, I started researching and talking with some of the authorities in the field and attending medical conferences about this to understand why and how keto so dramatically changed my and my wife's Judy's lives. The purpose of this podcast is to share our journey of discoveries with you and understanding how keto is so effective in improving so many different conditions, from obesity, epilepsy, diabetes, infertility, MS, Alzheimer's, heart disease, to name a few. So take a step away from all the hype you've probably heard and roll up your sleeves with me and join me weekly to explore this living miracle that anyone can access. We'll talk science, we'll talk food. We'll explore its history and evolution to today, which is that the sheer wonder of the ketogenic way of eating has changed untold number of lives, unlike anything before it. And in case I forget to mention it, please join our Facebook group, Keto Naturopath. Hi, this is Dr. Carl Goldkamp, and welcome back to another episode of the Keto Naturopath. Today, this is a little bit impromptu topic, and it reviews a little bit of something we covered before. That is, you remember the two-part podcast just last week or the week before on Dr. Bocchicchio. Dr. Bocchicchio was, in my view, and I've done some research on it since talking to him, the founder, and I use that word very informally, and he doesn't use that word at all, the founder of very slow movement training, resistance training. The reason I sort of hesitated as I said those words is because one of his students, somebody who was in college at the time that he was teaching this, remember he has 2 PhDs, Dr. Bocchicchio, was Ken Hutchins. Ken Hutchins went on to write a book called Super Slow Training and subsequently start a franchise. So he wrote a paper in 1984, I believe it was, called Super Slow Training. And in that, he cites Dr. Bocchicchio, taught him that. And he got this from Dr. Bocchicchio. And then he went on to write a book. And then he went on to establish a franchise called Super Slow Franchise. How did I miss that? So now you sort of see a little history. The history is important because how I came into super slow, and by the way, all this, I can stamp another word to this, HIT, high intensity training. So high intensity training is exactly what it sounds like. It's lifting heavy weights on a variety of various exercises for a very limited period of time. You can't lift a heavy weight. By definition, you can't lift a heavy weight for very long. So it's self-explanatory. So the level came, the unique perspective that Dr. Bocchicchio had, and this started in the 60s and 70s when he was doing this. And by the way, this is at the same time of the invention of Arthur Jones, who is the creator and founder of Nautilus and all the subsequent changes that Nautilus company has gone through and all their really interesting exercise machines, the various CAMs. So all this was happening at the same time. It's like this renaissance of resistance training and how to make it more appropriate on a per-person basis. Now, when you think back to the 70s and 80s, you don't think back to people going to Gold's Gym or going to the gym to work out, lifting heavy things. What you think of is Jane Fonda in her tights and everybody going to aerobics class. And that was the thing, is everybody went to aerobics class. Ken Cooper in Texas developed his area, and he coined aerobics. So you had totally different aspects of what was considered exercise back at that time. And both have their benefits. So they're not like competing with each other. One's not right and the other's not wrong, but they offer very different things. And it's unfortunate when one totally obliterates the benefits of the others in terms of the news that reaches us, whether it's advertising or just quote unquote content. And so I feel that HIT, high intensity training, was really never sufficiently covered. And it was sort of left it was forgotten. It was forgotten until high intensity interval training, which is called CrossFit by another name, got started in the early 2000s. And so then you heard HIIT versus HIT. So anyways, back to slow fit. Slow fit. I just made that up. Back to super slow training. So the super slow training is so profoundly metabolically beneficial that's why I'm doing this additional podcast, to make sure the benchmarks of it are very easy to understand and make it worth your time. And there's a few components. I think when people start to do this, they tend to forget some important points. And so, again, back to the history. Dr. Bocchicchio, Ken Hutchins, who I just talked about, to Dr. Doug, this is now an MD doctor, Dr. Doug McGuff, Guff, wrote a book called Body by Science. And that's where I started, Body by Science. And Body by Science was all about HIT and an approach which was a count to 10. Count 10 out, count 10 back. So if you're lifting, it's 10 up and it's 10 down. If you're doing a row or a pull down, it's 10 down and 10 back up. So you get it. Count to 10. However you want to get there, it's slow. And so the slowness is very important. And in fact, the slowness came out of working with osteoporotic women. They wanted something slow that did not stress their joints and did not risk fracture. So anybody can do this, as Dr. Bocchicchio says. And he works with, wheelchair patients, heart patients, the elderly, which now I'm part of apparently, or nearly, or getting there, and people in their 70s and their 80s and their 90s. So we can all do this. So it's something that everybody can do. And everybody will get to this threshold thing. So what I want you to know, it's slow, very slow. If you need to count to 10, count to 10. Since that's where I start, I still almost automatically count to 10. But you're just going slow, the same speed out and the same speed back. And the other variable is you need to have it last, the intensity be so hard for you that you can't do it less than 40 seconds, and you can't do it really more than a minute and a half, which is 90 seconds. So from 40 seconds to 90 seconds, and this is general. So if you're lifting a weight or wherever you are, if you just can't do this for that long, then you need to lighten the weight. So it's got to be at least 40 seconds. And if you're doing it longer, so you're going out very slowly and you're coming back very slowly. And if you're going longer than a minute and a half, 90 seconds, you need to increase the weight. So it's pretty basic formula, right? 40 seconds to 90 seconds. It's not science. If you quit a little earlier, fine, but you know what you're trying to do. You're trying to lighten the weight, you're trying to increase the weight, so you stay within that boxed period of time. And in that boxed period of time, you are not resting. So they refer to that as time under load. So when you go to the top, you don't hang for a second to get that rest. You barely touch that top. Up and then down. And when you get to the bottom, and it's down then up. So you're making sure there is not a resting point. It's a continuous stress for that period of time. And that's a very important point because it's very easy to psychologically cheat on this. You go down and you just take that second or two, and that changes things. It's not going to ruin it, but you know the point that I'm after. Keep it clean. Keep it 100% time under load. Okay. There's that. So we have the 40 seconds to the 90 seconds, a minute and a half. It's not etched in stone, but it's pretty much. So this concept about threshold, and this is really the magic, the concept about threshold. That's why the 40 seconds to the 90 seconds. Either increasing the weight so you can have less time under a minute and a half, or decreasing the weight so you're greater than 40 seconds. Hope I don't need to go over that again. So the threshold is what you're trying to induce by being at such an intense level of stress from the very first. You don't get this warm-up set. You don't go, I'll do a few reps. No, forget about reps. If you need to warm up, do a minute on the cardio or whatever your thing is, and then come in. I don't even do a warm-up. I just stretch out a little bit sometimes. And you hit it hard. That's why it doesn't last long. And you go on to the next exercise and you hit it hard. So that intensity is the magic. Okay, so now I'm going to differentiate that intensity from, let's say, aerobics training. The intensity you get with HIT, super slow resistance training or slow motion training, however you want to refer to it, now that you know the concept, is that it's hard and it's very uncomfortable. And what you're doing is you are triggering acute stress. You are triggering acute stress. You're triggering epinephrine and cortisol. Remember the bear running after you in the woods and you're running for your life? You are triggering acute stress. So this is a variable that has to be there. You can't just have a good workout. You have to trigger acute stress with these muscle groups that you're going to go after. And you can vary it, and I'll tell you what we do. So there's you don't have to be so, it's pretty much cookie cutter, but you don't have to be so worried you're doing it correctly or not. You need good form, so you're not going to struggle under it. So you need good form, of course. Okay, so acute stress. I'm going to talk about stress because there's chronic stress and there's acute stress. Acute stress triggers cortisol and epinephrine. Chronic stress, what is chronic stress? Chronic stress you get from a sustained, usually emotional stress. You really don't apply the bear chasing you and running for your life in the category of chronic stress. Chronic stress is usually you're under some sort of emotional strain, could be from your relationship, could be financial issues, could be sickness in your life, could be loss of loved ones, a death, sickness. It could be, layoffs, all these things that or when you're at work, you get a lot of job stress. Somebody is not approving of your work, or you have too much work to do. You don't have any control over this, and it's ruining your sleep. You're asked to get up in the middle of the night to be on call all the time for any of the jobs that are there. This online work now, you can work at home, but you're always available. So there's really no boundaries in terms of when you're off, and this is family time. So that chronic stress is something that's always on our shoulders, and you may lighten it a little bit by being with your family, going to the movies, going on vacation, but it's something that is not just a moment in time. It's the opposite of going for high intensity training. It's the opposite of a bear is chasing you in the woods. There's a book about this, and it's a great book, and it's a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it's gone through 3 editions. I read the first and the second, but not the third, and by a guy named Robert Sapolsky. He is he's at one of the California colleges. I think it's University of San Francisco. University of California at San Francisco. And so, and he's written a couple other really interesting books as well. And he probably has the biggest beard in all of academia for the last 100 years. Interesting guy. So what he goes over is really what happens with chronic stress. And he uses, zebras. Why zebras don't get ulcers. And by the way, ulcers is one of the manifestations of chronic stress. You get too much stomach acid and not enough protective coating of your stomach is secreted, and you start getting ulcers. Usually the top, it's not just in your stomach, but the top of your small intestine. Anyways, it's uncomfortable. You start to bleed. It's something some people don't even notice until they suddenly get it, and they find blood in their stool, or sometimes they might even cough up blood. So they're not always painful. Sometimes they're painless, but as dangerous. So what he finds is, like, unlike the zebra that gets chased by the lion or whatever, that once that chase is over, it either ends in death or escape. And once they escape, they can rest on the other side. They can go on the other side of the river, whatever, and they can rest. And when they rest, they catch their breath and they go back to eating and playing around. But when they run 100%. It's 100%. We don't live that way, unfortunately, much anymore. We live in a chronic stress of long commutes. There's another chronic stress. We live in the world of a lot of tensions that we wish we didn't have. They're not all self-created. It's just the world we live in right now. So that tends to, by the way, chronic stress is not just, it doesn't release epinephrine. It does release some cortisol, but it does release other pro-inflammatory, if you want a fancy word, cytokines, pro-inflammatory chemicals. How's that? And in those pro-inflammatory cytokines, chemicals. It also makes you hungry. So why does it make you hungry? Well, cortisol and these inflammatory markers tend to produce a lot of sugar.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Stress and trauma happen inside of our bodies, so we can't just heal them through talking. We must also heal them through feeling. My name is Luis Mojica. I'm a somatic educator and nutritionist, and I'm also the host of the Holistic Life Navigation podcast, where every week I teach you how to release stress and trauma and find a safety inside of yourself through nutrition, self-inquiry, and somatic experiencing. Join me over at the Holistic Life Navigation podcast or visit me at holisticlifenavigation.com.
A lot of sugar, a lot of glucose. So in essence, you are producing donuts for yourself to eat. So the high stress person is eating donuts, their own donuts, whether they want to or not. So here's what happens. Some of you are thinking, well, wait a minute, you didn't say anything about food. You're saying they're producing sugar, they're producing glucose. Yep, they are. As your glucose finger prick level increases, just like it would if you did eat a donut, you still have the same benefits. Your insulin goes up, your glucose goes up, your insulin goes up to keep your insulin down, but your stress is still there, still producing the insulin, your glucose. Your glucose is not going down. It goes down intermittently when your insulin comes up, so you're still in the same battle. It's primarily driven by the stress to the glucagon, if you really need to know that side. And so you're making it yourself. It's all an internal production of glucose. Still, it's glucose and still the same side effects of waking up your insulin and the insulin shoving it away, all this glucose, and making you fat. And you haven't even eaten anything yet. So not only does it store that glucose because it tries to get it down to a normal level, but it also drives an appetite. You become hungry. Just like if you ate carbs, most of you that are listening to me now have been listening to me for a while, and you know that when you have a high carb diet or even a moderate carb diet, it makes you hungry. You want more carbs. So it's an upward spiral, if you want to call that upwards. It's just you want more. You get a little sugar, you want more sugar. It's the same thing internally. You're producing your glucose. It doesn't know how the glucose came into your body. It says, I want more. So now, not only have you already, before you've even gotten a mouthful of food in your mouth, which you're going to want, it can be carbs. So think of those people that work late, and think of the break room. What's in the break room? The break room isn't mayo and bacon or steaks or liverwurst or hard-boiled eggs or salads. It's donuts, it's crackers, it's candy, all these things. All these things are carb food. So just like the stress you got back in your cubicle, if that's the environment we're envisioning, or even your own house, what do you do when you're in stress and you're working at home because you can work at home and think it's a big privilege? You go to the kitchen, you open the fridge, or you go to the cupboards, and you pull out all those same snacks you would have found in the break room had you been at the office. So there you go. Internal increase in blood glucose that came about because of the stresses you were exposed to, those chronic stresses. They didn't have an ending point. They were, get it done, get it done, get it done. Is 5 o'clock coming? And then at 5 o'clock, you got the commute. Is 7 o'clock coming? And it goes on and on and on. I'm just using almost superficial examples, but you get the point. So back to HIT. HIT, there's so much in this one variable. HIT is requiring, and it's pretty obvious that it is, acute stress. So it is only putting out epinephrine and cortisol. So you're saying, well, that's sugar. Yeah, it is sugar. It's sugar for a short period of time. It's also, you're ketogenic if you're listening to this for the most part. So it's less of a push. It's up and done. It doesn't stay up and done. And then you go over to the next muscle group. And so in the course of maybe 15 minutes, you've done 5 exercises. So we do a squat, or we'll do a leg press. We'll then do quads, and then we'll do some hams. And after that, we'll do a pull down or a row. These are choices we allow ourselves. Or we'll do either you can do a bench press, or you can go to a machine and do a pec deck. That is basically the same thing, but it's easier to get to a machine, easier to set up. After that, you'll do triceps and biceps, and then we do lateral arm raises, with much lighter weights. So all of that, all those different groups, we do the same way. 40 seconds to 90 seconds, we either increase the weight if we find we're going longer than 90 seconds, or you decrease the weight. But as you start off, you find out your numbers get very specific. Just start keeping track. And so there's really only one direction you're going to go in, which is going to be increasing weights slowly. And maybe you might not increase weights for a month after you get started. So you'll make some progress pretty easily. So the point I wanted to mention, again, back to the acute stress versus the chronic stress, is that you're not triggering the long-term inflammation. You're triggering a local, so whatever muscle I'm using, let's say it's the pecs, I am pushing for a bench press, and I am pushing to as far as I possibly can go. And so I'm inducing a local stress for the muscles that are used for that exercise, and I am inducing a localized inflammation that the rest of the body is going to respond to patch up, to repair those muscles, which is different than secreting inflammatory markers for the whole body and driving systemic inflammation. So it's a local, very mild, you might want to say even injury, but it's a global response to a local action. A global response to a local action. It's brilliant. That's why you are very focused on certain muscles, and the rest of the body helps repair that. So now you work your way around the body. What you'll notice, back to this whole stress concept, because I think it rides a lot on this idea that you have reached acute stress on these, in essence, 5 exercises. There could be more, and you can more or less, but in these 15 minutes, you've reached acute stress, a variety of different exercises in 15 minutes, which is amazing. In your whole body, when you leave, you feel kind of remarkable. You might feel kind of wimpy and whiny when you're right at that edge, like, I don't like this. This is very uncomfortable. My wife and myself do it, and you either want to scream, and you can or can't, depending on the kind of gym that you're in, or you feel kind of wimpy and whiny that you just want to quit. So, and you're on the right track if you get into that spot. We kind of smile at each other saying, yep, you're doing it correctly if you're there. So when you finish that, you feel almost exhausted. And then I could go home and almost take a nap. That's not a bad response. But the other thing is, you will be able to relax for the whole rest of the day. You have a sense of lightness about you. Yes, you're a little tired in your muscles and how you carry yourself, but you have a sense of being relaxed unlike ever before. And that's the thing about chronic stress. You don't get that break. You don't get this opening of, I feel really good now. You might have felt that's why with chronic stress, people then go to drinking alcohol, something that gives them that space so they can just feel better. Well, with the slow HIT, is it for those 15 minutes, it is hard, but after that, you are very clear. You're very clear that, wow, things don't bother you. Even though you have your other issues, you've been cleansed of that other kind of stress. So that's really important. So acute stress versus chronic stress. Chronic stress puts on weight. And now I'm going to get into the metabolic aspects of the acute stress that you've induced for the 15 minutes. There's a couple important things. So one is, you're not going to go back and do this every day. We do it twice a week, and sometimes if we're busy, we do it once a week. And even Doug McDuff in Body by Science, which is the first book that I had read about this, really got into saying, the important part is making sure your body rests long enough so it can repair itself. And that's important. First of all, you're going to find it very impractical for you to go in more than twice a week. You're going to see the weights that you can push, whatever they are probably going to go backwards. It's too much stress you're giving your muscles. And I use that word loosely. So you need to give your body the time to rest. So you need to have at least 2, ideally 3 days between this. So they've recuperated. It means you can do other things. Go play tennis, bicycle, and everything else, and do as Dr. Bocchicchio would say, you can do activities. He sees this as exercise. HIIT is exercise, but all those other things are activities. So you can come back and do this. So you need to have enough time to let your body repair, and you're going to grow your muscles. And growing your muscles is called hypertrophy, of course. And that is important. No, you're not going to get so big muscles. You're going to be seeming odd. You're going to get some good strength. So don't worry about getting your muscles too big at all. A couple of years down the road, you'll have total self-control over this. So that should never be a concern. It's too hypothetical and too far in the future. So there's that. But so the acute stress drives a lot of metabolic changes that lead to fat burning. So you've worked for these 15 minutes. It then goes on for more or less the rest of the day. I think it's 4 to 6 hours. You've kicked up your metabolic rate because now remember I said the rest of the body kicks in to repair the stress you've induced those muscle groups. Well, now you have the rest of the day. If some people even think 2 days. I don't have the specific science in front of me on this, but you have a sustained elevated metabolic rate that came because you did the HIT, slow HIT. You hit threshold. And that's the difference. And so you now are burning up much more calories than with chronic stress you're putting on. Not only are you putting in fat, even when you're just stressing yourself, right? It's being stored away as fat. The insulin rises because the glucose rises, and then you want to go eat because you have this huge appetite. None of that happens. And so one of the things that Dr. Bocchicchio says, the mechanisms are metabolic, not thermodynamic. And what he means is not thermodynamic. Thermodynamic is you can calculate the calories of work you did by lifting those weights, and therefore those are the calories that you consumed. 1 equals 1. 100 calories of work, equaled 100 calories that were burned. So that's the 1-to-1. But the metabolic is no, because you hit threshold for these various exercises over a short period of time, twice a week, you now have kicked up your metabolic rate a lot higher for a longer period of time, and you are metabolically burning calories because of that, not directly because you did 100 calories of work when you lifted whatever weights. So that's pretty interesting. So you got acute stress is a positive thing, and that's the threshold you're hitting. You get that it's a metabolic increase in your BMR, it's called your basal metabolic rate. And so that's what burns your calories, not just because you did some work with the lifting the weights or the pushing the weights. You got that you needed to have a weight that was either so heavy or heavy enough that it took you between 40 and 90 seconds to lift to get to complete failure, muscle failure, stress, total stress. You couldn't do it again. And what you're also going to find, and this is where the science gets really interesting, I'm not going to go over this too much because I want to summarize what you need to do and what you needed to hit to get these benefits. But now you'll find, especially when you come away from the biggest muscles in your body, which are your leg muscles. Even Dr. Kenneth Cooper was talking about, you worked your leg muscles first because they consume the most calories, et cetera, et cetera. But you work the largest when you're doing leg press or squats. You come away when you finally finish that last one and you walk away to the quad machine as our next one for us, and then the hand, but you're walking down, you're almost teetering, but yet you feel you've been sprinting, for a mile, that you feel you have this you've just finished a huge cardiovascular event. And you go, wow. It's not that you can't breathe. It's suddenly you breathe clearer and you feel your heart has been pounding and so on. It's like, you bet, you've given, your whole body has been stressed, and your heart does get stronger because that's a muscle you're stressed as well. It's amazing. So I hope I'm making this clear. It's very simple, but hitting acute stress is very important. The specific period of time is very important. And you need to have the weight that makes you fail within a minute and a half, and that you can do longer than 40 seconds. Those are the key things. So you've got the concept of activity, which is doing tennis and all these other fun things, but this is exercise. You get that there's, I'm not going to go into the metabolic benefit, other metabolic benefits like of cholesterol and so on and so forth, but it affects so many other things. So I'm going to leave it at that. This was meant to be a sequel to Dr. Bocchicchio's, to keep it simple. So you have your muscle groups, you have your time, you have your weight, you have your threshold, which is your acute stress, which is not the same as chronic stress. That key kicks up your basal metabolic rate, and you're burning calories for the whole day. Some people argue even 2 days because of that. You need to have your rest of at least 2 days, if not 3 days. And rest, I don't mean not playing tennis or bicycling or whatever your activities are. I mean not doing high intensity exercise again. Okay, so you need to just let that go. You need to let your body repair those things, and you're going to see some sensational results. And for me, like everything, I go back and look into the history of things. Maybe there was somebody in the 1920s and the 1850s that came up with this super slow as well, but in my generation and in my time, this is the guy who came up with it and has implemented it for over 40 years. And so I give him all the credit. The subsequent people, made a good thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what they did. But this is the guy who thought it, did it, and limited people to doing only this. And he brought it to not just people coming to the gym, which Ken Hutchins and Doug McDuff are people who go to the gym. Dr. Bocchicchio, he brought it to patients. So he had patients coming in, cardio patients. He had, as for the elderly, he had all sorts of other people he brought this to. That's amazing. And so he also had to get that concept across. Well, guess what? It's going to be uncomfortable for just a little bit. Just a little bit. And we're going to have to do it uncomfortably every time you come back to see me. So, all right, there we go. Hope that was something. It's a good review. We have a lot of interviews in the pipeline that have already been done, just have to be worked on. And I'll do a few prequels. Dr. Westman, Dr. Stephen Cunnane. And so, onward and upward. We're going to try to do 2 podcasts a week to catch up on all this. And it should be exciting. Hope you're enjoying this. If you have any questions, by the way, send them to Dr. Goldkamp at ketonaturopath.com. I do get your questions, and I try to work them in. And sometimes I work them into the interviews to the people I'm talking to. Why listen to me? Listen to somebody else. Okay? So to all that, take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Hi, this is Dr. Goldkamp. I thought I would take a moment of your time to tell you about something that we've been working on for a long time. And that is our product of C8 Keto MCT oil. How is it different, and why would you even care about it? It's the highest purity you can find in the market, which is 99.7% caprylic acid triglyceride. And by the way, that's backed up by a certificate of analysis. It's not just me making up these numbers. But I think the bigger story behind our C8 MCT oil is not only that it is the most efficient way for you to create ketones naturally, and that is all 3 ketones, your beta-hydroxybutyrate, your acetoacetate, and your acetone. That's important. But the other part is it supports sustainably harvested palm oil. Why would you care? Because all the other C8 oil products out there, not the MCT oils, but the C8 MCT oils, some people call them ketogenic oils out there, they come from palm oil. And palm farming, specifically palm kernel farming in Southeast Asia, is decimating the rainforest there. Absolutely. You go on right now to Google or to YouTube and say palm oil Southeast Asia, and you will be in tears at the end of 10 minutes when you see the destruction that's happening. This is not part of that. This is the exception. So it's called RSPO, Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. You have to apply for it. You have to be audited by them. And it's a long, rigorous process. And it took us 2 years to bring this product to market. I hope you care. And I know you'll care about the efficiency in which it helps you make ketones. By the way, we don't drink this like it's a fluid. We put a little bit in our coffee. We make our mayonnaise out of it. We make various salad dressings out of it when we have a salad. It's basically I hate to say crutch, but it's my aid to keeping me in ketosis when I want to be in ketosis. It's fast, it's long-lasting, certainly longer lasting than exogenous ketones and much more holistic, as I mentioned, with all 3 ketones. That's about as much as I want to say. I hope you look into it. I hope you take your ketones readings on a regular basis, along with your glucose. If you do, then you really value this product. All the best, and I thought you should know.